Welcome to the Mischief Maker broadcast, where chaos, creativity, and common sense collide. Your host, Joel Freeman, was kicked out of high school in Alberta, Canada. He left home at 17 and hitchhiked around North America as a long-haired hippie and dope-smoking fool. He made a 180-degree change, becoming one of the first chaplains in the history of the NBA. As a professional speaker, Joel has traveled to well over 55 countries. His many books have been published in 28 foreign translations. Pieces from his Black History collection have been seen by millions at the United Nations and many other venues. And now, the Chief Mischief Maker himself, Dr. Joel A. Freeman.
Hi, Baby Joel here. You know, the clothes my mom puts on me just aren't fitting properly anymore. I thought my clothes were shrinking from the dryer, but it turns out it was from the refrigerator all along.
Well, there you got it. Baby Joel, he tells the truth every single time. And that was the truth. So, by the way, tonight's show, if you're an atheist, I want you to perk up a little bit. If you're an agnostic on your journey and trying to figure things out, the visible, invisible world what's going on. I want you to kind of lean in a little bit. If you're a skeptic, if you're a cynic, if you're someone that has a whole lot of questions and maybe even dealing with doubt, this is a show for you tonight because, we live in an age that speaks endlessly about certainty. And yet we're haunted by uncertainty. We talk about confidence, we broadcast convictions, and we reward people who sound so sure of themselves. It's all across social media. And but beneath the surface, and it's often unspoken, sometimes feared, many of us carry questions, and we just don't know how to name them, let alone resolve them. And these are questions about truth, meaning, is there a God? Whether faith can survive honest scrutiny. And tonight we have a guest. His name is Os Guinness. He's written a ton of books. In fact, I've got one right here. Back when I was working with the Bullets Wizards team, he actually autographed it to me. That was on February 22nd, 1990. How long ago was that? And it's called Doubt. Now he's written probably 40, 50 books since this book, Doubt. It was, I think, renamed In Two Minds, and you might want to pick it up if it's still in, I think it's still in print. But anyway, we're not going to hitchhike off the book. I'm not one who likes to just sell books or flog books or anything like that. I like to just have conversations with people. So tonight we're going to deal with the topic of it's kind of an arc where we're going to move from biography. We're going to get to know Oz a little bit. We're going to talk about his intellectual formation, his personal crises in his life, that kind of the anatomy of doubt a little bit, and then some wisdom that he has to share about things that he has learned in his life. And I think we live in an age that demands instant answers but punishes vulnerability. And tonight we're going to just approach this in I hope a way that is careful and yet kind of just ricocheting off the rails, just to have a grand time, a conversation that is going to be interesting. What we're going to do before we bring Oz on the screen, this is the world premiere, at least the world premiere here on the Mischief Maker Show. We're going to play a song, but while we're doing that, maybe you can check out the QR code above, and that gives the definition of a mischief maker. It kind of gives a link tree on all kinds of things. You'll be able to meet our guest, go to meet him. If any way you want to contact him, maybe to speak or something like that. So let's go to the song, and the song, it's called, well, I'll tell you what. It's going to come up on the screen, and you'll see it in just a second. The song I wrote and produced.
There's always someone doubting, throwing shade across your name. People pointing, whisper shouting, trying to make you feel some shame. But when your wire's steady burning like a beacon in the night, know who can pull you under when your heart knows what is right. Gotta know your why, connected to the Most High. When pressure mounts, look it in the eye. Valleys low or mountains high, it's the truth that breaks the lies. You can carry any burden when you know your why. It's always something, some new trouble, some new test. Plans that crumble with no warning. The weary have no rest. But when your why is carved in granite, not in sand that shifts away, know what can break your spirit or derail the rest of your day. There's always some time entangled, dreams delayed or doors shut tight. Moments where the clock feels ruthless, stretching morning into night. But if your why becomes your compass, pointing forward through the weight, no one can steal your promise or rewrite what God creates. There's always some place uncertain, foreign ground or strange skies, where your footsteps in quicksand and your courage is surprised. But when your why becomes your guide, like a lighthouse bright and tall, nowhere can stop your journey when your purpose starts to call. There's always some method missing, steps unclear or roads unpaved. Times you feel the silence louder than the answers that you crave. But if your why is strong and rooted, faith will show you what to do. No, how can halt your progress when your why pulls you through? Gotta know your why, connected to the Most High. When pressure mounts, look it in the eye. Valleys low or mountains high, it's the truth that breaks the lies. You can carry any burden when you know your why. So when your journey feels uncertain and battles multiply, and you're searching for a reason when your plans go awry, remember purpose isn't fragile when it's anchored from above. Your why is rooted deep in God and carried on a life of faith and love.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that song. I worked on that song for a few months, and I'm just very happy the way it turned out. And just anyway, we're going to invite Oz to come on the screen. Now, he's someone who's a writer, a thinker, a lecturer. His work has shaped conversations about faith, culture, freedom, and belief for more than a half a century. Born in China during a revolution and was raised amid dislocation, the heir to the famous family legacy. He learned early that the world is rarely simple, never tidy, and his life has been marked not by the absence of doubt, but by the courage to face it without flinching. Oz, welcome to the show. It's a joy to have you here. And we've known each other for what? At least since 1990.
Well, thank you, Joel. What a delight to be with you, and I love your song.
Oh my goodness, that means a lot, Oz. Thank you so much.
Who's the singer?
Well, I work with a group called Musiversal, and where I have a drummer in Portugal, bass guitarist in Brazil, and then all kinds of different instruments. We build the song, kind of produce it, and then at the end, and the singers, and at the end, everyone remains anonymous, and I own the rights to it. And we're now talking with some folks about maybe someone like a Lauren Daigle. Lauren, are you out there listening? Someone like her to maybe sing it.
Well, I hope you get it done, because I think, every human being longs for three things, I think: meaning, making sense of life; belonging, knowing your place in the world; and what you've covered in that one, purpose, know your why. So that was profound and very moving.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. Well, Oz, it's you were born and raised. I think you were born in China, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it was a time of great disruption, politically and culturally, just upheaval everywhere. How did you, in that early time of instability, shape the way you think about belief, about faith, about certainty, just about dealing with the doubts of life?
Well, I was born in what's often considered the very low point, the nadir of the 20th century, 1941. The Japanese had invaded China in 1937, killing 17 million in the invasion. And we were caught in an area between the Japanese army on one side, the Communist army on the other side, and the Nationalist army on the third side. And in 1943, I was only 2, but my parents told me about it later, there was a terrible famine in which 5 million died in 3 months. Locusts came in, and within a week, the crops had gone. And there was starvation, and there was cannibalism, and people selling their children for an evening meal. My 2 brothers died. My mother was a surgeon, no food, no medicine. And when we joined the group of refugees trying to find food and so on, there were 10 million on the road. So I nearly died. My mother nearly died. But we made it out, mercifully, to cross the Himalayas and into India and then back to Britain. And then we went, as soon as the war ended, my parents went back out again this time to Nanjing, which is the capital of so-called Free China. And that part I do remember. I was a boy, and I'll never forget the day, January 1949, when my dad said to me, "Son, we're in trouble. Chiang Kai-shek has abandoned the city, and we're at the mercy of the Red Army." And they came closer and closer, crossed the Yangtze, and took over the capital. And the reign of terror began. And I was there for 2 years they festooned the town with loudspeakers, and there were trials in the morning and executions in the afternoon.
How old were you?
I was 7 to 9,
Oh, my goodness. Wow.
and then nearly 10. And the fear was palpable, something like the French Revolution and the reign of terror. So the point in answer to your question, though, Joel, my first 10 years were filled with war, violence, death, revolution. In other words, a very realistic schooling in life. And I find now that I'm living in America, many Americans are incredibly naive. About the only death they've seen is sort of actors dying in films and popping up again. And the unrealism and the naivety is shocking. And, I'm very wary about, say, Marxism. And anyone who's lived in Eastern Europe under the Soviets knows what that's like. And so we're in a dangerous time. And I just wish everyone, know your why. People need that meaning, belonging, and purpose to really ride through the storm safely.
You grew up in a very difficult situation. I mean, extremely difficult, and yet you're the great grandson of Arthur Guinness of Guinness Ale. The family, right?
That's my family, yes, but you shouldn't say I'm the heir. I'd be a lot wealthier.
Heir of the legacy. Heir of the legacy.
descended from the youngest son of the
Uh-huh.
brewer. So I'm very actually proud of my heritage because, as you know, the Guinness family from the very beginning were terrific philanthropists, and they took enormous care for their workers with social welfare and sports clubs and death clubs and housing for those who couldn't afford it and so on. So our family became Ireland's most generous philanthropists. And we did a huge amount for Dublin, for Ireland, and for many people across the world. So I'm very proud of that. They were unusual in that sense, particularly in the 18th century.
Now, how did that affect your sense of identity growing up in that family, but yet juxtaposed against what you dealt with at a very early age?
Well, of course, living in China, the Guinness beer meant nothing.
Yes.
Although, once I went back to Dublin and I was in a cab from the airport to the center of the city. I don't know how the driver discovered who I was, but he stopped the car. And with a kind of mock flourish, he came round, opened the door, and kissed my hand as if I was the Pope. And he said, I'm partly joking, but your family has done so much for this city and my family. And I'm grateful for that. Our family truly has done. The current Netflix series on the Guinness, House of Guinness, a lot of it's just plain rubbish. And if you look at the real stories of the family, the generosity and the care for people who were less well off, I'm very grateful and proud to be part of that.
Folks, as you're watching this live, this is a benefit. You can ask any questions. Mel, our producer, will make sure that each question is germane to our topic. But anything that's on your mind, and of course, you're my safety net. If I miss a follow-up question, if I miss any question at all, feel free to come right in there and share your thoughts, ideas, your questions, so that Oz can respond in the manner that he does. Now, who were some of the thinkers, the writers, the philosophers in your early life that shaped your intellectual curiosity and your willingness to wrestle with honest questions?
Well, I don't know quite why, but I have met, of course, I've lived a lot longer than the average person in my mid-80s, but I met Chiang Kai-shek, the leader of Free China, when I was a 5-year-old. And then back at school in England, I had the great privilege, and this means much, much more to me, of meeting Winston Churchill. When I was at London University as an undergraduate, I met Bertrand Russell, the great atheist and humanist. And of course, many leading atheists since then, including people like Christopher Hitchens, who I met, sadly, soon after he got cancer, and we weren't able to continue our friendship. But it's been a privilege to meet so many people. When I first came to this country as a tourist in 1968 for 6 weeks, I was in Berkeley and met Mario Savio, who was the leader of the free speech movement in the 1970s. So it's been a privilege to meet all sorts of characters and leaders, many presidents, but above all, people who are searching and trying to make sense of life. Because a very key part of my life goal was when I was at a study center in Switzerland in the late 60s, early 70s, where many, many thousands from around the world came hitchhiking, wrestling, traveling, and searching for the meaning of life. We had Timothy Leary, who was into the LSD movement. We had some members of the Charles Manson gang who'd killed Sharon Tate and so on. And it was a wonderful place where people were wrestling up to 2, 3 in the morning, nonstop discussions. You go to a crossroads in Europe at that time when hitchhiking was possible. One person would be reading Nietzsche. One would be reading Siddhartha, Hermann Hesse's Siddhartha, The Road to the East. And one would be reading, say, C.S. Lewis. And the questions went on and on and on. And so that was the period, the late 60s, early 70s, that shaped my faith and helped me think through the meaning of life. And I'm so grateful because in the 60s, you couldn't get away with anything. Everything had to be thought through back to square one. And I love that, the challenge of it all.
Yeah, I've thought about, who am I? Why am I here? where am I going, are the three main questions.
Mhm.
And it seems like nowadays it's like the fourth is whatever. It doesn't seem to have the same level of searching as back in the 60s. Was it with Francis Schaeffer, Labrie in Switzerland?
Mhm. Well, the 60s were passionate in their searching. Then came the 70s, the so-called me decade, when people are into themselves, a very different world. And now, of course, hitchhiking is impossible. It's dangerous. And the whole wrestling, searching climate has gone. Now, it's come back in some ways. So 10 years ago, people talked about the mental health crisis among young people. It wasn't mental health. It was a meaning crisis. People didn't have any faith they were brought up with, and they were into basically nihilism. And you can think of the new sense of a serious searching in France, in England, much more secular societies, and certainly here, following, say, Charlie Kirk's death, a huge number of people rethinking what does it mean to live life and find a purpose. Your song is the perfect expression of that.
So, what were some of the basic things that you were wrestling with back in the 50s, 60s, in your younger years?
Well, I was at school, a boarding school in England. My parents were under house arrest in China. So I didn't have my parents close to me in my teenage years. And my own search for meaning, I was, having grown up, say, in China, I knew a fair amount about Buddhism and Hinduism. I wasn't terribly interested in the Eastern religions. They were world denying and often in retreat. For me, the search for meaning was a debate. It was 2 years I was reading, thinking, talking to people. And on one side, Nietzsche, the grand iconoclast atheist, and people like that. Jean-Paul Sartre. My hero as a teenager was Albert Camus, with the passion of his existentialism. And then on the other side, the Christian thinkers like Blaise Pascal, the extraordinary Frenchman in the 17th century. Anyways, the grandfather of the computer. And then great thinkers like G.K. Chesterton, who's such a character, and of course, C.S. Lewis. And it was after 2 years of thinking, wrestling, debating, I was finally convinced the Christian faith was true. And since then, I've tried to open my thinking to anything I come across. People of all sorts of faiths. And Joel, the way I put it now, and I've talked to many philosophers about this, there are basically 3 families of faiths. By that, I mean families whose faith has a common family resemblance because they go back to the same roots. And if you see it that way, while there are 1,001 philosophies in life, there are only 3 families, and they're basically the Eastern, Hinduism, Buddhism, the New Age movements, the secularist family, atheism, agnosticism, materialism, and so on, and then the biblical, Jews and Christians above all, but also to some extent the Muslims. And those 3 families of faiths are quite different. And the differences make a difference. And I think contrast is the mother of clarity. And it's when people see where the different ideas lead to, not just how they start, but where they lead to, that people can really see which one they need to choose, which one has the deepest answers, and which one can be seen above all to be true.
And looking back, was doubt something you encountered first as an emotional experience or an intellectual challenge or a lived reality or a combination of all 3?
Well, I wrote that book, which is my second book. The first book is on the 60s, on the counterculture. But I wrote that book because when I was talking to people, those were actually not my doubts. But I met many people who had doubts and they felt bad, as if they were betraying whatever faith they were into by doubting it. But of course, if you know the history of thinking, doubt is not the absence of faith. Doubt is a kind of being double-minded. You have a faith, but it's undermined and challenged by something. And so people are in 2 minds. So you've got faith at one level, and you've got unbelief at another level, and doubt is always the halfway house. So someone who is in doubt no longer believes as they once believed, but they're not disbelieving or unbelieving. They're in that halfway house, and it's going to be resolved one way or the other. So like a penny, you toss it, is it going to come down heads or tails? Well, doubt will always either move back to faith if it's resolved well, or if it's not resolved, you move on to skepticism and unbelief. So I was challenging people to see it's not that bad to experience doubt, but you need to think through where it comes from and how you resolve it so you can come back to a clearer, surer, better faith.
Can you describe a moment as you look back when doubt felt genuinely threatening to your faith and rather than sharpening it?
Well, as I say, the doubts I've got there, the categories of doubt and so on, are not mine. They're the doubts I got from talking to many, many people. So undoubtedly, I've been through times that have been an incredibly blow. And for me, the hardest thing for faith is when you're facing radical, malignant evil. So interestingly, say before 9/11, I had prepared a curriculum on evil for a group in New York. And then a week ahead of the discussion, the hotel, the St. Regis, phoned us up and said, "I'm so sorry, we double booked. We can't host it." And then came 9/11. And I thought the group, people from Morgan Stanley and Goldman Sachs and so on, wouldn't want to meet. Many of them been to 20 or more funerals in the weeks after 9/11. But we eventually got together back at the St. Regis, and the only other people were a group that was doing grief counseling for having lost so many of their workers. And I'll never forget the chairman who started, he said, "When I read some of these readings before 9/11, I thought they were a little dark for me. But when I read them now, they're simply not dark enough for what we've seen looking evil in the white of the eye." And I think the challenge of doubt is the toughest when you face real, malignant, radical evil. It can be something like 9/11, which is big, cataclysmic, or it can be a personal thing, like the tragic loss of someone you love totally. But those are the deepest questions. I've got another book called Unspeakable. It's not actually one of my bestsellers, but it's a book I absolutely love because the heart of it goes in how you ride out the storms when the challenge of evil just seems overwhelming and your little boat looks as if it's going under.
When you think about evil, wait a minute, we have someone, Paul Semmel. Bobby Kennedy once said, "Some people look at things as they are and ask why. I look at things as they are and ask why not. I'm Jewish and I ask, why me? LOL." Any thoughts on for Paul?
Well, my heart goes out to you because clearly the way Jews have been treated by the Europeans and now by the whole world with the rising anti-Semitism is one of the most malevolent, malignant evils the world has ever seen. And if anyone wants to see the problem of humanity, it's the problem of inhumanity. I've twice been to Auschwitz. My own family back in the 19th century were raising money to buy land in the Ottoman Empire so that Jews from places like Russia could go to have safety. And our family has been fighting for Jews ever since then. My great-grandfather was actually behind the Balfour Declaration. So whoever's asking this question, my heart goes out to you as we think of Bondi Beach and the horrendous rise of anti-Semitism now. But I knew Elie Wiesel. I have a collection of autographs above my desk, and one of my favorites is One Page from Night, his little novel, which he signed. And on the surface, as anyone read Night, it looks as if the young Elie Wiesel lost his faith. But as you know, Elie was a passionate, devout Jewish believer. And I believe that while evil challenges us to the core, can God be good if evil is that evil? I believe it's then that faith becomes truly real. And there are certain things that are the anchor in the storms of evil.
We come back. Paul, hold on with that. And with that thought, we have to go to our sponsor for a few moments, the Rosetta Universe.
I traveled throughout much of Egypt, creating detailed sketches of ancient ruins. Many of those drawings ended up in the magnificent Description de l'Égypte. Help the Rosetta Stone Traveling Exhibit Project transform an ancient artifact, the Rosetta Stone, into a modern metaphor for problem solving. Make it a priority.
Well, there we have Vivant Denan sharing his thoughts about the Rosetta Universe. If you go to the QR code above, I think number 1 on the link tree, there's a link to the Rosetta Universe. We have folks like Smokey Robinson, Ben Carson, and a host of other people who are on our advisory board. And you can learn more about that there. Also, another thing that hitchhikes off that is that I've designed this beautiful World Championship belt in honor of a gentleman by the name of Jack Johnson. And every penny that we raise from this will go to the Rosetta Universe Project, the initiative. And so feel free. We're only making 700 of these and worldwide. And so go to Linktree. I think it's number 2 or 3, and you can learn how you can acquire one of these. These are incentive gifts. So we thank the Rosetta Universe for being the sponsor for our show. Now, coming back to our question with Paul, I believe it was, Paul said the Dutch during World War II saved many Jews. That's true. And there's many other incredible stories about that. But I thank you, Paul. What I wanted to say is that Viktor Frankl wrote the book, Man's Search for Meaning. I had an opportunity to, back when I wrote the book, God is Not Fair, I reached out to Victor. We talked I somehow found his number. This is all pre-digital. And we talked for about 20, 25 minutes, had just an incredible conversation. And I sent him a copy of the book, and we had some more communication after that. But in there, Freud looked into the past for meaning and for understanding human behavior. But Victor, he had this logotherapy looking forward in searching for meaning. Anything you want to share about that?
No, I've read the book too. It's a magnificent book, and I'm glad you're in touch with him. I've known a few of the survivors of Auschwitz, both Polish and Dutch. And certainly it was those who had meaning that gave them hope, that allowed them to weather the terrible pressure that Auschwitz and Dachau and many of the other death camps meant. But we've really got to ask ourselves, because clearly humanity is now at a crossroad again. And you can see that we're not only post-Auschwitz, post-Hiroshima, we're now pre-singularity. And the whole movement towards post-humanism, for a long time we've had people saying they felt they're in the wrong sort of bodies, men, women, and so on. Now people are saying the fact that we're in bodies at all is our problem, and we need to download to machines. And you can see there's a disparaging of human nature as we've known it to this point that is really a massive identity crisis, deepened, of course, by AI, which some people are saying is the last human invention because it'll put us out of business. Anyway, it's a time in which meaning has to take on board who on earth are we as humanity? I love the fact that the highest, clearest, strongest view of human worth is the Bible's view that we're made in the very image of God himself. And I know no other deeper, richer counter to some of the extraordinary things being said and done today, including the death camps, than that. But we have to think. It's just one more example. This is a time when we have to think deeply about what is the meaning of life, what's the faith in which we trust, and how we're going to sail through the storms that are clearly coming.
I visited Majdanek in Poland a number of years ago, and my goodness, I felt that Dachau and Auschwitz, others were more sanitized in comparison. I mean, it was just you just saw just rooms full of shoes or uniforms or whatever it might be, clothing. And I left there. I remember once when I was at Dachau, there's a group of young kids from a local school, I assume, and they were laughing and joking when they first came in, and I just observed them through the whole experience. And toward the end, you could see a sobriety and a whole different demeanor about them. You want to speak to any of that?
No, you're exactly right. I've actually been to Auschwitz twice.
Mm-hmm.
And the first time was when my wife and I went when it was under the Soviet Union. And it was not sanitized at all. And you had the irony of the unvarnished horror of the death itself, but all within the context of the setting of the Soviet oppression. So you had one in the envelope of the other, and it was incredibly challenging. So yes, we can go to the Holocaust museums, but we really have to take evil very, very seriously, and very few do today.
What practices, I'm talking about intellectual, spiritual, relational, do you think help people in dealing with doubt without rushing to some type of a premature type of an answer or response to it?
Well, you can see from the question that just came up on the screen, people view faith as some sort of giant leap in the dark, against reason, with no substantive evidence. And that's totally wrong. That's blind faith. And I think that's horrendous. For me, I've written a book called The Great Quest. And if you think of seekers who are looking for faith and coming to faith that's a credible faith, an intelligent faith, there are always four broad stages. The first is a time for questions. Something in life triggers the search. And the seeker is someone who now is looking for an answer, and they're serious. The second stage is a time for answers. You look at all the different faiths, philosophies, worldview, and do they throw light on the questions I have? Stage 3 is a key one, and the one that often people miss out. A time for evidences. In other words, not just enough to say, yes, this faith, philosophy, whatever it is, gives me incredible answers, but is it true? And that's the key one that a lot of people miss out. And the fourth stage is a time for commitments. In other words, faith is never arm's length. It's something we give ourselves to wholeheartedly. I'll never forget when I was writing the book, I read about a European in Kenya. And he was writing something about faith, and a friend of his who Kikuyu warriors looked at it and said, no, that's a terrible word. That's like the word ascent, a long distance notion. He said, you're like a European hunter with a magnificent rifle and sights, and you can shoot an animal 1,000 yards away. That's not faith. He said, our word for faith in Kenyan is the word used of a lion leaping and all four legs enveloping its quarry. That's faith. A human being grasping and grappling with what they believe to be true. So you've got to think through all the four stages. So faith is not a leap in the dark. It's a step in the light, having thought through it at every particular stage.
I know when I read the book, Doubt or In Two Minds, you mention that faith faith and doubt are not opposites necessarily, but often components of it. Doubt is often a component of faith. Why do we often treat doubt as moral failure, or other than something that is, rather than something that's a human condition?
Well, I think in a day when everyone believed something, and the Christian faith was the broad consensus, certainly in America, in much of Europe for many, many centuries. As soon as someone has a question or a doubt, they feel they're letting the side down or betraying the faith. No. you can see now doubt is only a halfway stage, as I said before. And many of the languages of the world, Chinese has a foot in two boats. English, you're in two minds, and so on. It's a halfway stage. It's got to be resolved one way or the other. But in a day when you have 1,001 faiths in the room all the time, I mean, I'm living in Washington, D.C. If you go up 16th Street, it starts with the White House, but within 2 miles, you've literally got an example of every single religion that's ever been in America in 16th Street in 2 miles. We're living in what's called a diverse or highly pluralistic society, when people are rubbing shoulders, being challenged, questioned, attacked by people of all sorts of faiths. So it's not surprising that people have questions, people have doubts, and people need to resolve them, because what matters is that we all come to the conviction of that which we believe is the answer and, above all, is true.
Now, how does emotional doubt differ from intellectual doubt? And the tools or the resources that might be used for one may or may not work for the other. How does that work?
Well, I mentioned the place of truth in coming to faith. Someone who doesn't have that will always be open to the Freudian challenge. You're just projecting. You're believing because you have a need for wish fulfillment. And unless you know it's true, that intellectual doubt will always be there. But what you're describing as emotional doubt can be very different. For example, someone who's come out of a broken home, who's never known the love, say, of a father, they can have an uncertainty there and a fear that grows out of that, or a hesitation and a doubt that's purely emotional, without the solid grounding of a father's love or parent's love as a whole. There's a hole there. There's a draft there. And when the wind blows, the draft will blow through, and it's drafty. And someone has a very natural emotional doubt. Now, it's no use answering that with an intellectual answer, any more than it's any good answering the intellectual doubt with an emotional answer. You've got, as it were, talk to the person who's doubting and discover where the doubt comes from, and then redress it by answering it very practically and specifically.
Now, you've also said that some doubts are called good doubts. What makes a doubt healthy and rather than destructive?
To be perfectly honest, I wrote that book more than 50 years ago. I can't quite remember what I was saying there. But if we use doubt to challenge what it is that's making us doubt and then resolving it, doubt can be very constructive, because when we come back, we have a stronger faith that's filled out and adequate at the point at which earlier it was weak. If faith had been what it should be, solid and adequate, then there wouldn't have been doubt at all. So there's let's say now, I'm not sure what I meant by that then, but let's say now that if faith is resolved, you can look back and say, thank God I had that doubt. It's been resolved, and my faith now is twice as solid as it was before.
When I was younger, I went through a period of real doubt. And I often say that, or have said that, my convictions, my theological, moral convictions I have today, I've entered through the back door of doubt. And I remember going to the University of New Hampshire, and I would start conversations with students. This is back in the, mid 70s or so. And I'd start conversations with students. And then when I got stumped, and I got stumped often, where I just had no response, instead of using that as, oh my goodness, I'm an idiot, what am I doing here? Instead, I would use that as kind of like a spur that kept me moving forward to study, so that I could have some type of response to that in the future, that would be credible.
Yeah, no, that's good. Today you often hear the people on shows saying, ask me anything.
Yeah.
And the idea is almost that I'm capable of answering every single question. I'm not. For example, I have a great friend, John Lennox, who's debated with Christopher Hitchens, Richard Dawkins, and so on. He's a mathematician and a scientist. My background is in the social sciences, not the hard sciences. And I'm pretty clueless in some of the deep questions, which comes from, say, quantum physics and so on. So all of us know some things. We should never pretend we know all the answers. But if we're stumped, and we have a really interesting or a deeply poignant question that requires an answer, we have to say, no, I can't answer it, but give me a day or two, give me a week or two, and I'll get an answer for you, because I think your question deserves an answer. Francis Schaeffer, whom you mentioned, his motto is always, I want to give honest answers to honest questions. So some questions are dishonest. People are just playing with ideas. But we don't always know the answer to every question immediately, and we need to own up when we don't. I'm sorry, I don't know that, but I'll find an answer for you. It's a good question.
I did a daily talk show for 11 years in the D.C., Baltimore area, and that was a favorite of mine. I don't know what you're saying. I don't know what you're talking about. I don't understand. I'd have no response. But I tell you what, come back tomorrow and we'll call me again. We'll have rolled up our sleeves and have a robust conversation about it, because I will study.
That's terrific. Yeah. And there's a humility in that, which is very important.
Well, I've often thought it's just being able to say I don't know is just as important to say I think I know about something like this, and it's important. Now, we're dealing with probably in the time we've had even to talk here, AI has become exponentially smarter, and we're dealing with social media, all kinds of different digital elements in our lives. Do you think that social media and digital life have intensified doubt, or have just revealed what's already there?
I think the latter. But we need to tackle what it is that AI does to us as far as we're able to understand it. So the Economist came out last week with their word of the year, which was slop. In other words, the pig swill, by which they meant the AI-generated drivel and consumerism that's filling so much of our lives and our mental arteries. And that's a very low-level problem of AI. You move up to a more serious one, the difference between truth and falsehood, and the possibility of deception and then manipulation through power. You move up higher to the way we're outsourcing more and more of our humanity. So muscle power, of course, but now people finding intimacy in relationships with AI bots and so on, and solving their grief problems. And then you move up to the very highest of all, where AI threatens to replace our humanity. C.S. Lewis in The Abolition of Man, or AI now becoming our God. And we're idolizing and worshiping this super intelligence. And I personally would speculate, the rise of the so-called Heinrich Heine, the great German poet, called Karl Marx a godless self-god. And he was talking about what the Enlightenment has produced. And we've got now ideologies which are really massive godless self-gods, like communism, like fascism, like Nazism. And I think we're about to see the birth of a new ideology, a super ideology based, Marxism is based on class, fascism on race, fascism on the state, rather, Nazism on race. And I think we could well see a new super authoritarian ideology that's based solely on mind and wisdom, and truly is attempting to be as close to God as anything can be. So AI is worth following. It is a useful tool, but one we've got to watch with extreme care.
How does the pressure to project confidence in public spaces affect people who are quietly struggling with their own ups and downs and all arounds regarding belief and doubt?
Well, the trouble is with so much uncertainty, and uncertainty because of the crisis of meaning, and then the deeper uncertainty because of the crisis, say, of broken homes and so on, There's a people longing for certainty, which means they're vulnerable to demagogues or vulnerable to super salesmen in consumerism. In other words, we are liable to be duped unless we think carefully. An unexamined life, not worth living. People need to know who they are, who they believe, what they believe, why they believe, and so on. And back to your thing, know your why. And without that, we are all vulnerable. And you can see today across the world the vulnerability to strongmen. Putin in Russia, Xi Jinping in China, let's say on a different level, President Trump in this country. There's a vulnerability to strong men and people who have confident, brash answers to everything, and a lot of people who believe them, sadly, unwisely, to their peril.
Now, when people are searching for answers, where would you place the Bible in that whole panoramic view of literature out there and thinking? And why? Where would you place the Bible, and why would you place it there?
Well, the Bible is the only book that has two faiths having their sacred text in it, Judaism and the Christian faith. And it is the book that makes the biblical family, the monotheistic family of faiths, which is the most powerful faith. Most of the world, whether it's Christian, Islam, or whatever, believes something that's come out of the Bible. And I believe the Bible, it is a story of many stories. It truly gives you not only the most profound answers to life, but that which is true. But people have got to read it for themselves and think it through for themselves, probably beginning with something like one of the four Gospels, John or Luke, to really say, what's the Bible telling me? Who is this person, Jesus? What do he claim? And so on. So the Bible is the book to start with a good modern version, but it really has answers. I've studied under a guru when I was in my 20s, read the Upanishads, the Bhagavad Gita, and looked at the Pali Canon, listened to Buddhists and so on. Of course, I met Bertrand Russell when I was a student. I've read Russell and Dawkins and many of the others. None of them give you answers like the depth of the answer and the profundity of truth that you have in the Bible. You know, I'm currently thinking a lot, this isn't a political program, but if you talk about a human-friendly future, where do you find something with a high view of human dignity, a deep view of truth and freedom? It's in the Bible. Many people don't realize, if you go back to the ancient world, there was no freedom. People believed in fate. It was in your stars or the oracle for Oedipus Rex. You think the modern world, we believe in freedom. Wait a minute. There isn't a major atheist intellectual who believes in freedom. Freud, Marx, Dawkins, B.S. Skinner, Sam Harris, go on down the line. None of them believe in freedom. Where do you have a grounding for freedom? The Bible. Jews and Christians are the champions of freedom. The Bible gives you the underscoring of freedom. You don't find it elsewhere. So people who dismiss the Bible as some ancient myth and text, they're really foolish. I've read it now for 70 years. And every year I'm amazed at things I didn't see last year, the profundity of the wisdom of the Bible.
If someone watching, we have people in India, Australia, all across Europe, different other parts of the world, Japan, watching this at this moment, someone who has never engaged with the Bible, what would you say to that person?
Well, I would say in a very simple way, it's important for me when talking to seekers, contrast is the mother of clarity. Differences make a difference. So read the Bible. Say, start with the Gospel of John and just ask, what's this story about? And who is this person, Jesus? Who does he claim to be? And what's the difference it would make if God is the Father of Jesus and you have a God who's not part of the universe, the sun, the moon, the stars, or whatever. This is not pantheism. This is quite different. And then you start to see the answers about life. You have the profoundest meaning, the deepest sense of belonging, and you have a clear sense of truth. There's simply nothing like it. And now, of course, anywhere in the world, you can be in Japan and read it. You can be in Europe. Well, I'm European. You can be in any country in the world, but always contrast is the mother of clarity. And when you see what the Bible is saying and the Christian good news is saying, and the difference it makes compared, I mentioned freedom. You could take human dignity. Why are we more than animals and more than machines? And which faith, which philosophy gives you a grounding for the highest human dignity? Atheism doesn't. Hinduism doesn't. You know, my grandfather was one of the first Western doctors in China. And there was a time he was in the imperial palace, a serving girl spilt the tea, immediately taken outside, put headfirst down a well, left to die. Life was cheap. Where does a high view of human dignity come from? The Germans in the Enlightenment, you had life unworthy of life. And that's why you had the gas chambers. But where do you have a view that every single human being, the poorest, not just the rich, the plainest, not just the most beautiful, they're valuable. It's in the Bible. And you could go on down the line. The Bible gives you the profoundest answers.
We have about 3 minutes left. Is there anything that you feel is very important to communicate at this time?
Not really, whatever you like to ask for, but I would say that the world itself and humanity is at a crossroad. The West is. We've got a crisis in the West. You've got a crisis in America. My own prayer and hope is that there'll be enough people all around the world who will work towards what I call a human-friendly future. A high view of human dignity, a high view of freedom, strong view of truth, a passionate view of justice, and that together we can stand against the global menace, which is authoritarianism, power. You know, Nietzsche's last words in his posthumous book, The Will to Power. Do you want a name for my world? He said, this world is the will to power and nothing else besides. That's our world. Very, very dangerous. It's going to be an inhuman world unless we stand together for freedom, justice, high view of human dignity, all of which, as we've been talking, are in the Bible. But that's my longing. This is an extraordinary time. In America next year, this is the 250th anniversary. I hope people will think, where has the American experiment slipped? And needs to be put right. Because we're at an extraordinary moment for the world, for Americans, for Europeans, for humanity.
With 1 minute left, you've used the term freedom a few times. Please define that.
Well, freedom, very simply, is the ability to choose between options and to exert your will in accord with the choice you've made. It's as simple as that. Now, most modern intellectuals don't believe in freedom. If you can figure out how we're influenced by this, that, the other, we can never do otherwise than we do. We're not free. Freedom is actually the gift of the Jewish and Christian view of God. And it's one of those areas that needs to be thought through because freedom is being undermined. It's why increasingly there's a crisis of liberalism, which obviously depended on freedom. And we're in a post-liberal world. We're even moving towards post-rights, no longer human rights. Human rights are now said to be species centrism. This is terrible. We're in a very, very dangerous world unless there's a rediscovery of those truths that make for a high view of dignity, including freedom.
Oz, it has been a real joy to have you here tonight to share your thoughts and ideas. Really appreciate you, Oz. Thank you.
My privilege, Joel. Thanks for having me. And again, congratulations on that song. I hope it goes viral. And it's a huge hit.
Thank you.
You have just experienced another episode of the Mischief Maker broadcast. Hit the subscribe button. Connect at chiefmischiefmaker.com. Thanks for coming along for the ride. And hopefully, you are now a bit closer to becoming a mischief maker in your part of the world.